Hey guys, so in today's video, we are going to talk about why it is so hard or takes so long to get an autoimmune diagnosis. Autoimmune or not, if you have to see a rheumatologist, I want to go over today why it's so hard. So we're going to break this video down into 3 parts because there are barriers in the healthcare setting system that makes it hard to get a diagnosis. There's barriers within just the conditions themselves that makes it hard to get a diagnosis. And then there are barriers within ourselves as like the actual patients and individuals that they all factor in there. So I'm going to break the barriers down by those 3 sections. So we're going to start out with the rheumatology conditions. What is it about just the conditions themselves that makes it hard to get a diagnosis? Number 1, they're chronic. So chronic means it happens long term. Okay, so like if you fall and scrape your knee, that's acute. You fell, you scraped your knee, it took less than 24 hours and you go and get it treated and it's reversible and that's it. It's very sudden and it's bam, bam, bam. Chronic diseases happen slowly over time for months and in some cases years before you start to even feel anything. Then when you finally do start to feel anything, it's like really minor stuff initially, where it's just like you just notice it, but it doesn't like impact you doing your daily life type stuff. And then because there's such vague symptoms, like you don't know what it's even pointing at. So like a lot of these conditions, I don't care if it's autoimmune or not, if you have to see a rheumatologist, most of us deal with fatigue. Okay, when that slowly creeps up, and that's the only thing that's creeped up, how many times do we attribute, oh, I'm tired because I'm stressed out, I'm doing too much, I didn't get enough sleep. Okay, those are acute issues. That's not chronic. And then you might slowly start to feel pain. And it might start out mild. It's not going to usually start out like, oh my gosh, unless you injure something. You'll start to slowly feel pain or some tenderness. You know, like, like it's noticeable, but it's not impacting you being able to get up and go and function. You know what I'm saying? And again, this isn't everybody, but a lot of people, this is how autoimmune diseases tend to creep up. And I can speak for that personally because this is how it happened with me. Or I just feel sick all the time. You know, like no reason whatsoever, but like I'm always feeling nauseous. I'm always feeling tired. Even if I go and eat my usual soup that helps me feel better, it's not really doing anything. I'm feeling full all the time, or I'm just not hungry anymore. You know, or like, oh, I just realized I've lost a little bit of weight. You know, stuff that doesn't point to anything specifically. I mean, it could easily be something that could be temporarily changed. It could easily be something acute. Like, something's wrong at this point. Like, something's noticeably wrong, but I don't have to go to the ER because I can still function. You know, I can still go to work, go to school, do everything just fine, but like, something is wrong. But all these pregnancy tests are negative, which is good because that means that what I'm doing is working. You know, you see how those symptoms, they're so vague. It's interesting because if we're thinking that way and our minds first go to those things, is it really any wonder that when you go and see a doctor for that thing, they're thinking the same thing? I'm just saying. So the vague symptoms make it really hard for you to even pick up that something's going on. And by the time you finally are like, hey, something's going on, it's been going on for a while. Like it's been going on for weeks, months, and for some people it takes years. I know people it has taken 9 years and going from doctor to doctor to get a diagnosis. On the individual level, you're busy with life. You know what I'm saying? You might be a little bit tired here and there starting out, you know, or you might start to have tenderness and pain here and there starting out, but most of us have a lot going on. And I can speak personally for me with my process. when all this was happening, I was so focused on 12-hour night shifts, full time as a hospital nurse on a cardiac floor. So I'm just trying to stay up from that. And any of y'all who work night shift, it's even easier for you to put all these things up on that. Well, it's because I work night shift. You know, the body don't like that. And then by the time you get to that point, right, where you're like, no, something is not right. First off, don't ever second guess that gut. If you feel like something ain't right, something ain't right, because that would not pop up for absolutely no reason. Okay, I do want to say that. But by the time you get to that point, okay, and you've been in, a lot of people that I've seen, they've had this pain for a while. So you have that chronic pain. You've learned to live with it at this point. You know what I'm saying? You've learned to live with it at this point. You have to some degree adjusted to it. I mean, if you don't do that, how in the world can you function? You still haven't connected all the dots. A lot of times you're at that point where like something's not right, but I don't know what. For a lot of us, it's totally new. I mean, I'm a nurse. I was going to grad school and my mind didn't even think autoimmune for my stuff. And it wasn't until I talked to my therapist at the time, who happened to also have an autoimmune condition. She was like, you think this might be autoimmune? And I was like, nah, that ain't gonna happen to me. No one else in my family has that. Like, no. Yeah, no. So once you finally get past your own individual barriers of, hey, something's going on, and I don't know what, or something's going on, and I'm pretty sure it's autoimmune, whichever camp you're on, then you have to look up all these different conditions, you know, because you're like, well, I wonder what it could be. You know, a lot of people look that up. And then when you go and read about the rheumatology conditions, you're just like, well, it could look like all of these things. I don't know what I got. The healthcare aspect of barriers. After you get through the barriers that just the rheumatology conditions themselves present, and then you get past the individual barriers, which are absolutely nobody's fault. It's just the combination of those two. It makes it so hard to connect the dots. It just does. So then when you finally get to that point, you're like, okay, something's wrong. I don't know what. Or this might be autoimmune. Then you go into the healthcare system, right? Well, you have to most of the time go through a primary care doctor, urgent care doctor. Someone has to give you a referral most of the time. So first off, most providers, nurses, healthcare people, we're not trained on rheumatology stuff. We're not. The only people who are trained so they can go and listen to your story and be like, oh yeah, that's autoimmune, the only people who do, rheumatologists, who specifically went through years of training to actually be able to have the knowledge to do that. So they went out of their way like, I want to learn this. Nurses who were like, went out of their way like, I'm going to work in rheumatology. That's not a majority of us nurses or providers out there. Most of us don't have a clue. I learned a lot just from working in a rheumatology office myself as a nurse, and it clarified a lot of stuff that was not clear to me when I was doing research on my own on the computer. And I also learned a lot just being a RA patient, but that's beside the point. School in general, they don't go over that. They either lightly gloss over a couple of the autoimmune things, or they don't really go over it at all. So like, if you talk to most providers, do they have an inkling of what rheumatoid arthritis is? Yes. Do they have an inkling of what lupus is? Yes. Do they know how to diagnose it? No. Many of them do not. Have they seen a lot of people in that process? Not really. The providers that end up, and the nurses and the healthcare people that really end up being helpful are the ones that listen. And again, they're human, so you know there are some that have that cognitive bias. They don't listen to patients very well. There are some that don't. Then you have some that they listen to you, but they're not thinking autoimmune. They're thinking of all the acute stuff that you already have been through and ruled out. Because nurses and providers, we're trained to rule out acute stuff first before we go and start looking at chronic issues. Okay? So if you come in and say, I'm tired all the time, that's why you might hear one of the first things be, well, do you get enough sleep? Now, in your mind, you're like, I've been through this already. I already know it's not a sleep issue, but they don't know that. Unless you, as the patient, go and be all the way ahead of them, okay? And you go and tell them all the reasons, all the ways you've already ruled out all the acute causes. It's going to go like this. Okay, try getting some more sleep and we'll follow up with me in a couple weeks. Okay, well, it didn't work. Okay, well, let's go and try XYZ. Come back in 2 weeks. No, 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 no. See, as the patient, you have to go and essentially explain to them how you have ruled out why it isn't all these acute things, why it's not stress, why it's not a sleep issue, why it is not a vitamin issue. You have to tell them this has been going on for months. Not just this is just a one-time thing or it's only been in the past couple weeks. Or you have to let them know if it's been years, if you've been one of the people it's been going on for years. Because unless the provider has the illness themselves, they're not looking at the exact same lens that the patient's looking through. You know what I'm saying? It's similar, but there are going to be little nuances that are going to be different. So you got that unawareness issue. There's like the lack of awareness. Then once you get through that, there's still the lack of experience. Many providers have patients that have like rheumatoid arthritis or fibromyalgia or lupus. But see, the thing is, by the time they get those patients have already been diagnosed. So they don't have to do any guesswork to try and identify it. They're just told, okay, this person has this. So on hindsight, I expect, you know what I'm saying? It's like the answers are given to them already. They're not having to be the ones to figure it out. So if your provider does not have a lot of experience actually diagnosing someone with an autoimmune condition and their cognitive bias, you see how it's hard to even get the referral for some of these docs because, again, some of these providers, they're not trained on it. The only people that are really thoroughly trained on it, to be honest, are the people who either end up treating a lot of these patients or they went to school specifically to study it. That's not a majority of the providers out there. So when you have that barrier, plus the rheumatology conditions barriers I talked about, plus your own individual barriers, it makes it very, very difficult just to even get the referral. And then when you finally get the referral, guess what? There's a shortage of rheumatologists, so you have to wait months to go and even see one to begin with. Not every state even has a pediatric rheumatologist. Where I worked, we had people that had to legitimately cross state lines on a regular basis, almost every month, to get their child care because they don't have any pediatric rheumatologists in their state. So, I mean, there's so many different barriers. Before the pandemic happened, and then when you finally go and see the rheumatologist, if they do not have access to all the things that was done, like the tests and things that were done before the referral, or if the primary care provider person or whoever gave you the referral didn't do the basic tests that the rheumatologist needs to give you a diagnosis, you're going to go into that first appointment and you're not going to have an answer. What you're going to end up getting is, we have to do all these tests, we have to do all this blood work, and then you got to go and follow up. Hope there's an opening, because again, there's a shortage of providers, so they're booked out the wazoo, and then you might get a diagnosis. Then after that, you got to go through insurance to get proper treatment for some of this stuff. You see why it takes a long time to get a diagnosis, and why some people wait years. You know, it's tough. And then you know, you're the patient. You didn't go to school to learn all this stuff, so you know, you don't know everything that you have to ask. But then if the providers aren't very familiar with it, they're not going to ask you all the right questions, so you're just kind of going in circles for a while before you even get the referral. Does that make sense? It is a very rough process. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, be sure to share it with someone else if you think this could help somebody else with their process. I would love to hear your experiences, you know, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.